I got the call at 2:47 in the morning, and I remember the time exactly because I'd fallen asleep with my phone on my chest, waiting for a text that never came, and instead I got this. It was Marcus's sister, not Marcus. That's the first thing that told me something was wrong because Marcus never let anyone else touch his phone, not even to order pizza. He fell off the roof, she said, and her voice had that flat, exhausted calm that people get when they've already cried everything out of themselves for one night. He's okay. I mean, he's not okay, but he's alive. Broken leg, some ribs, they're keeping him for observation. He keeps asking for you and not me, which, thanks Marcus, really nice. I want to tell you I sprinted out the door. I didn't. I sat on the edge of my bed for maybe 10 full seconds just breathing because Marcus climbing onto roofs was not new information to me. He did it when he couldn't sleep, when his head got loud, when his dad called and said something that took 3 days to stop echoing, but Marcus falling was new, and my body didn't know what to do with that. By the time I got to the hospital, he was propped up in a bed that looked too small for him, one leg in a cast from ankle to knee, a bruise blooming purple-yellow along his jaw, and he looked up at me and said, completely straight-faced, "I did not fall. I was pushed by fate." That's Marcus, 26 years old, breaks himself falling off a roof, and his first instinct is a joke, because if he doesn't make it funny first, someone else might make it sad, and he can't stand that. I didn't laugh, I just stood there in the doorway with my jacket still zipped up wrong, and something in my chest did this slow, twisting thing like a rope pulling tight. He noticed. He always notices, even when he's the one who's broken. "Hey," he said softer, "I'm okay." "You're not okay, you fell off a roof." Semantics. I sat down in the plastic chair next to the bed, and I didn't say anything else for a long time. Because the truth was I'd known Marcus since we were 14. Since he moved in 2 houses down and asked to borrow my bike pump like it was the most normal thing in the world to just walk up to a stranger's yard. And in 12 years I had never once let myself really look at how much it would break me if something happened to him. And now something had. The nurse came in to check his vitals and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he'd need someone at home for the first few weeks. Stairs were out. Cooking was going to be a problem. Someone needed to help him shower, change the dressing on his ribs, and get him to follow up appointments. Marcus's face did something complicated. "I'll figure it out," he said too fast. "He lives alone," his sister said to me, not to him, like he wasn't in the room. "Third floor walk up, no elevator." I heard myself say, "He can stay with me," before I'd actually decided to say it. My apartment was 1 bedroom. I had a couch that folded out into something resembling a bed if you didn't mind a metal bar in your spine. None of that mattered in the moment. What mattered was the look on Marcus's face when I said it, this flicker of relief so raw and unguarded that he had to look down at his own hands to hide it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know. I'm serious, Eli, I can hire someone or—" "Marcus," I said his name the way you say it when you need someone to stop talking, "you'd do it for me." He didn't argue after that. He just nodded once and looked out the window like there was something interesting out there in the parking lot lights. And I understood, the way you understand things about people you've known for over a decade without them ever having to say it out loud, that he was fighting not to cry, and that if I acknowledged it he'd never forgive me. The first night I brought him home was rough in ways I hadn't planned for. Getting him up the 2 flights of stairs to my place took almost 20 minutes and a lot of words I'm not proud of. He kept apologizing, this constant low murmur of sorry, I know this is a lot, sorry, and by the 3rd flight I actually stopped and looked at him and said, "If you apologize one more time I'm leaving you on this landing." He laughed, then winced, because laughing hurt his ribs, and then he looked at me with this expression I didn't have a name for yet. Living with someone you've loved as a friend for 12 years does something strange to time. The first week, it was just logistics. I learned how to change gauze without looking squeamish. I learned that he liked his eggs almost burnt at the edges, which I somehow hadn't known despite eating breakfast with this man probably 400 times in my life. I learned the sounds he made in his sleep when the pain meds wore off at 3 a.m., this quiet, stubborn breathing like he was trying not to wake me even while unconscious. I didn't sleep much that first week, partly because the couch really was as bad as I remembered, and partly because I kept listening to him. It was on night 9, I think, when things started shifting, though I didn't clock it as shifting at the time. He couldn't get comfortable. His ribs ached whenever he lay flat, and he'd been propping himself up on pillows that kept sliding, and around 1 in the morning I heard him swearing quietly in the dark and got up to check on him. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the way he always said it. "You're not, you're making a face like you're being murdered slowly." Accurate description of my ribs, yes. I ended up sitting on the edge of my own bed, his bed for now, helping him rearrange pillows, and somewhere in the middle of that he grabbed my wrist, not hard, just enough to still my hands, and said, "Can you just stay for a second? Not because I need help, just stay." I stayed. I sat there in the dark next to him, our shoulders almost touching, neither of us saying anything, and I remember thinking with a kind of quiet horror that I didn't want to be anywhere else in the world, that some part of me had been waiting a long time for him to ask me to stay. I didn't do anything about that thought. I filed it away the way I'd filed away every other thought like it over the years, in the drawer labeled things I will never say to Marcus because it will ruin everything. The days settled into something like a rhythm. I worked from home most mornings while he sat on the couch with his laptop, pretending to be productive, actually watching cooking videos he had no intention of ever replicating. Around noon I'd make us something and he'd criticize my technique while eating everything I gave him. And in the afternoons, when the pain meds made him loose and talkative in a way he wasn't normally, he'd tell me things. That's when I found out why he'd been on the roof in the first place. "My dad called," he said one afternoon, apropos of nothing, staring at the ceiling. "Before that night." I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that if you pushed Marcus, he'd close up like a fist, but if you just let the silence sit, sometimes he'd fill it himself. He said some stuff about how I turned out, you know, the stuff. He waved a hand vaguely like he could physically bat the memory away. I wasn't trying to do anything up there, if that's what you're thinking. I just needed to be somewhere he couldn't reach me. The roof felt like the only place high enough. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the hospital or the cast or any of it. "You should have called me. You would have come." "That's the point, Marcus." "I know." He looked at me then, really looked, and his eyes were wet, though he wasn't crying, just close to it, holding it right at the edge the way he always did. "I know you would have come, that's kind of the problem." I didn't understand what he meant, not fully, not yet. I asked him what he meant and he just shook his head and said, "Nothing. Forget it," and changed the subject to something about the cooking video, and I let him because pushing him past his own limit had never once worked in 12 years of friendship, and I wasn't going to start now. But something had cracked open between us that day, and it didn't close back up. 3 weeks in, he could get around on crutches well enough to make it to the bathroom without me hovering, which felt like both relief and loss at the same time, this strange grief for a closeness that had an expiration date I hadn't asked for. I noticed I was disappointed by his independence, and I hated myself a little for that, because what kind of person is disappointed that his best friend is healing? It was around then that his ex showed up. I didn't know Daniel was coming. Marcus hadn't mentioned him in months, not since the breakup, which had been messy and quiet in the way breakups are when one person is still in love and the other one just isn't anymore. I opened the door to a guy I recognized from old photos, holding a get well card and a bag of takeout, looking uncomfortable in the hallway of an apartment that wasn't his. "Is Marcus here?" he asked, like it wasn't obvious, like this wasn't clearly my apartment and not his. I let him in because what else do you do, and I watched Marcus's face when he saw who was standing behind me, and it did something I recognized instantly, because I'd felt it myself more times than I wanted to admit, that specific flinch of a person trying very hard not to show how much someone used to matter to them. Daniel stayed 20 minutes. It felt like 2 hours. He talked about his new job, asked shallow questions about the accident, said things like "you look good," all things considered, in a tone that made my jaw hurt from clenching it. When he left, he hugged Marcus a beat too long, and I stood in the kitchen pretending to wash a mug that was already clean, and I felt something ugly and hot in my stomach that I didn't want to look at too closely. After the door closed, Marcus exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole visit. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, weird seeing him." He was quiet for a second, weird that it didn't really do anything to me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, 6 months ago that would have wrecked me for a week. Today I just kind of watched him talk, like watching a rerun of a show I used to like." He looked at me and there was something careful in his expression, like he was choosing each word with tweezers. "I think I've been distracted." "Distracted by what?" He didn't answer that. He just looked at me a beat too long, then looked away and said something about being tired, and I let it go because that's what I always did. I always let things go with Marcus, and I was starting to wonder if that was kindness or cowardice. That night I lay on the fold-out couch staring at the ceiling, and I made myself actually think about it, really think, instead of shoving it in the drawer. I thought about the roof. I thought about him grabbing my wrist and asking me to stay. I thought about the ugly hot feeling watching Daniel hug him. I thought about 12 years of borrowed bike pumps and late-night phone calls, and every single time I told myself this is just what best friends feel like. This is normal, everyone feels this way about their best friend, and I finally admitted to the dark ceiling of my own apartment that I had been lying to myself for over a decade. I didn't sleep that night either, different reasons this time. The next morning I was scrambled eggs and silence, trying to act normal, and Marcus caught me staring at him over the stove, not even doing anything interesting, just sitting there with his crutches propped against the table, morning light doing something unfair to his face, and he said, "What?" "Nothing. You've been weird since Daniel left." "I'm not weird. Eli." I put the pan down. I didn't plan what happened next, which I think is the only reason it happened at all, because if I'd had time to think about it, I would have talked myself out of it the way I'd talked myself out of it for 12 years. "Can I ask you something?" I said, "and you have to actually answer it, not deflect with a joke." He went very still. "Okay. What did you mean on the roof when you said it's kind of the problem that I would come?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. He looked down at his hands, at the crutches, at anywhere that wasn't my face. "Because you always come," he said finally, quietly. "You've always come for 12 years, every single time, no matter what time it is or what I've done or how bad I am at asking for help. And I used to think that's just Eli, that's just what a good friend does. But somewhere along the way I stopped being able to separate wanting you to come because I need a friend and wanting you to come because I just want you there. All the time, not as a friend." And that terrified me more than falling off a roof, if I'm honest, because at least a broken leg heals. I don't remember crossing the kitchen. I just remember that 1 second there was space between us and the next there wasn't, and I had my hands on his face, careful of the bruise still fatting along his jaw, and I said, "You could have just told me," and he laughed, wet and disbelieving, and said, "Could I though, because you've never once given me a reason to think." I kissed him before he could finish the sentence, because 12 years of a reason was standing right there in my kitchen with a cast on his leg and eggs burning on the stove behind me, and some things you don't need more evidence for, you just need to stop being afraid of the answer. He made a small sound against my mouth, surprised, and then his hand came up into my hair and the crutch he was leaning on clattered to the floor, and neither of us moved to pick it up. When we finally broke apart, he was breathing like he'd run somewhere, which, given the ribs, probably hurt, and he said, "The eggs are burning," in this dazed voice that didn't match the words at all, and I said, "I don't care about the eggs," and kissed him again. I won't pretend the weeks after that were simple. They weren't. There was a strange, tender awkwardness to it, the specific kind that happens when you take 12 years of practice distance and suddenly stand too close. We didn't know how to be new at something we'd already known so well. I'd reach for his hand out of old habit and then freeze, unsure if it meant something different now, and he'd catch me freezing and laugh, not unkindly, and say, "You're allowed, Eli, you're allowed now," like he had to give me permission every single time until it finally stopped feeling like I needed it. His ribs healed. His leg came out of the cast 6 weeks later, and there was this small, ridiculous ceremony where I helped him take his first real steps without crutches across my kitchen floor, both of us laughing too hard, him gripping my shoulders so tight it left marks, and when he made it the whole way across he didn't celebrate the walking. He just kissed me, right there in the kitchen where it had all cracked open, and said against my mouth, "This is the part where I say thank you for catching me, and you say something annoying like I'd catch you off any roof," and I roll my eyes, but I mean it. "I'd catch you off any roof," I said. "Told you you'd say something annoying." He didn't move out after that, not really, not all the way. He kept his old apartment for a few more months out of some stubborn insistence on not moving too fast, and then one day he just showed up with 2 boxes and said, "I'm tired of pretending I don't already live here," and that was that. Sometimes I still think about that roof. I think about how close I came to never knowing, how easily this whole thing could have stayed folded up in that drawer forever, both of us performing the same careful distance for another 12 years, another 20, until we were old men still calling each other best friend and meaning something neither of us had the courage to say. I think about how strange it is that it took him breaking almost every rib on one side of his body for both of us to finally stop protecting ourselves from the truth. He asked me once late at night, half asleep with his head on my chest, if I regretted not saying anything sooner. I told him no. I told him some things need exactly the amount of time they take, and if it hadn't happened that way, on that roof, in that hospital room, in my kitchen with the eggs burning, maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. Maybe we'd have kept circling each other forever, too scared to land. He was quiet for a while after that, then he said so soft I almost missed it, "I'm glad I fell. Don't ever do it again. Wasn't planning on it, turns out I've got someone worth staying on the ground for now." I think about that a lot, actually. How the worst night either of us had in years turned out to be the night that finally let us be honest. How sometimes the thing that breaks you is the exact thing that finally lets someone else see all the way in. I don't know if I believe in fate the way Marcus joked about it that first night in the hospital bed. But I believe that some people are worth 12 years of waiting and worth every single time you show up at 2:47 in the morning without even having to think about it. Because some part of you already knew, long before you were ready to admit it, that you were always going to be the one who came.